All right. Everyone remember to sign into the document. I'm going to say it looks like we don't have any new phases. So on to the first agenda item, search API. Take it away, Travis.
Yeah, I made some changes from yesterday's discussion that I wanted to quickly go over again and just verify that there weren't any other outstanding items. I'll share my screen. Oh, let's see, actually, let me go. This will work. There's three things that really stood out from yesterday's discussion. One was about versioning, which I went ahead and indicated that we will be doing versioning. Right now I have a V1 version value right now into the URL. Subsequent ones would be like V2, V3, VN. Another item that was brought up was, it was heavily discussed, this idea of having a common, like using this common specific payload value for a build pack for a particular version and reusing that, keeping it as data that's available in the payload resulting from search results and kind of higher level namespace build pack name endpoint right here. So as you can see, highlighting is not working really well, but this payload underneath the latest section does reflect a one-to-one of the payload that is also described for the specific version. And that's being reused in these other endpoints.
Was that, I just realized it was in both search and in the specific build pack one. Yeah. Was it the one in there in /buildpack/namespace/name seems fine, but I worry about it a little bit in the search still. I think it was Javier that was kind of passionate about this, but I was wondering if instead of the data structure, we could have a similar link to like whatever the latest version is. Yeah. But only for search, and then in the other endpoint, actually provide the latest chunk.
Yeah, I mean, when you add a dashboard to it, we'll probably want some meta. So I'm just thinking high level here. When we have a dashboard that returns a list of results, like in a web client, we'll want to show some high level metadata for each of those results, which I guess we could get.
Yeah, which
from an individual link as well.
Yeah, it could also be like,
yeah,
like collapsed. Like each build pack has a little arrow next to it. You click that, and then it follows the link to get the rest of the data on the, when you click the thing. So I feel like there's some UI things we can do to avoid getting it at once. You sort of, you are absolutely pushing that onto the client. But I think that's the trade-off I'm proposing. I don't know. Does anybody else feel strongly about that latest chunk?
Javier's not here.
Yeah, Javier's what I feel strongly, right?
Yeah, he's probably the one to really get feedback from.
I think starting with a link makes sense to me. Be easy enough to add latest in later.
It feels like we're just recreating our own API standards here of what we're trying to do to some degree.
Yeah, definitely. What would you suggest though, Terrence?
I feel like there's prior art and like stuff like JSON API or other things where they have concepts of the ability to, if the client wants to have the API include it, you can basically pass params in a certain way to it to basically get that data back.
Kind of like a GraphQL.
Yeah.
but by
No, I
default it
don't.
does not.
Oh, okay.
Right. But is that something that we could like where we could omit it for now and then add that later on if we feel it's needed? I guess like I'm hoping to keep this as simple as possible on the first iteration, you know, and this little chunk actually really changes the implementation.
I mean, to definitely simplify it for sure. Just starting out with a consistent list of versions that you can get detailed information for, allowing the client to dive in deeper on however it wants to with those particular versions.
Yeah, I mean, I know a big part of that, those designs are to basically minimize the number of API calls. Because on the front end, that's like pretty, like I know on our own dashboard on Heroku, right? Like making multiple API calls is very expensive.
Yeah, the N+1. Yeah, I mean, I guess I was thinking less about that. Which I think I guess what I'm proposing is like, we'll deal with that problem when we have a sufficient volume of requests that it becomes a problem.
Sure. I guess part of it's just like, if it's already designed, it's a standard that's out there, like, why are we inventing our own thing? It's kind of the counterpoint. I mean, there's alternatives to JSON API, but I think like basically they serve literally to solve this exact problem that we're trying to solve here, right?
Yeah, maybe I'm not familiar with it enough to know exactly what you're talking about.
JSON API is like that's the one I'm most familiar with because of the Ember stuff, but like it's a basically standardized way on like how the payload gets constructed, of like how you include or exclude, and it centers around like the thing Travis was showing before with Buildpacks, like resources, right? So it's like if I want to include multiple resources in a thing, this is how I do it. If you want to do pagination, if you want to reference links and other things, like it's basically standardizes what the JSON payload should look like. So adding it on top would basically be revving V1 to V2 because it'd be a totally different payload, right?
The schema would change,
Yeah, the schema would change.
Definitely.
I see. I guess I'm reluctant, though, to complicate things and for the sake of something like that, because this isn't really meant to be like a very complicated API, right? Like this is pretty, like this is meant to be very slim, only do a few things. If we're talking about a more complicated API, I think we're talking about a Buildpack registry service, which is what we were avoiding, which maybe we'll do one day, but then there's a whole bunch of other crap we're gonna have to change. So
I mean, me personally, I'm inclined to go the most simple route, and I feel like this particular problem is maybe harder to solve, going from a bottom up approach as opposed to a top down. Like I think probably once we start actually creating a rich client experience, some of these things will surface more easily on how the customers are interacting with it. So I think that's why I'm more inclined to also be very simplistic in my initial iteration of this. So however that looks, just to get started and then, you know, iron out those wrinkles, drive the requirements based on how like this rich UI experience might look like that's actually consuming this.
Yeah, I guess the pushback for me is like, we know one of the use cases is a front end client. So shouldn't we design an API that is built for that use case?
I think that's still the case, right? Like what we're saying though is a maybe like opinionated UI. Like it's not meant for arbitrary UIs. It's meant for one very specific one, and this solves all the things we need for that specific UI. It doesn't support like a bunch of other things that somebody else might want to do. So let me ask this: if we were to change latest to be a link, exactly the same structure as what's in the versions, would anybody vote against that?
Or we could
I
just
mean,
put it.
is it just an array of links then at that point?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you make like latest a special thing.
I would almost be tempted to just add latest. I mean, it's already in the versions one, but just make sure that we document that it's a sorted list of versions from most latest to the top, or we could call it latest in the actual key.
Yeah, any of those seem fine to me.
Yeah.
Do we want to make it possible to get just latest specifically? Like using the word latest instead of a version?
Yeah, that's
like in the URL, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I
Seems
called
fine.
that out actually. I think I was going to support that. Yeah, like instead of having slash version, have slash latest.
I guess it means that you can't have a version named latest. But did we end up going to semver
No, it's
format
semver.
versions?
Yeah, yeah, you can't
Semver.
anyways. However,
Yeah.
like go down to the slash buildpacks slash namespace name. If you keep the latest here, which I'm fine with that actually, that would be sufficient. But if you want to do a slash latest too, that's, I mean, that seems fine to me. I guess I would base it on what you think you'll need for the UI. Like if you have a Packetto build pack that has 1,000 versions, well, I guess if you have some kind of pagination, it won't matter anyways. But
yeah, I do like these two. I think these are pretty clean and they make sense. But yeah, talking through this a little more, I am torn.
I'm not. I don't think we should have the latest.
So? Basically replace this latest with something like this.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely simpler starting out, and we could see how it goes once we actually consume it from a client.
I mean, but like if you just have a link, you're actually going to make all those queries, right?
No.
Yeah, you're gonna have to at least get the latest query, get.
No, not necessarily. Right?
I mean,
like, it
you want the
depends
name, right?
Yeah, we at least want the name, right, and some high level idea of what this build pack is, so that the user can look through the list and decide whether or not they want to drill
into it. Are you suggesting to parse the URL to grab what the name and stuff is?
Oh, because the query doesn't have it. Yeah, I was thinking the query would have it. Yes, I am then.
Okay, so
parse the ID from the URL, or why parse it? You could have the server provide the ID as part of the structure somewhere without having to without having to go anywhere else to get that information. But I think from the UI perspective, no, it's all the description license, and that's the stuff that complicates it.
Yeah, like would a user like to know offhand, like, oh, I don't really want to deal build packs that are non-MIT versus, something else, Apache or whatever, and to have that at the front and center, would that be advantageous or not?
I mean, we're not allowing people to search on that stuff yet.
It's true. Yeah, we are not searching on that yet. Right now, it's just namespace and name. Decisions.
Is there anything other than the issue of the latest that's
I think that's the biggest one. Otherwise, I noticed through discussion yesterday, it was a bit confusing to have the name query for a query field. So I changed this to just call it matches for now. So basically return anything that matches this value.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, like if I have a search API, I would expect to be able to query based on fields.
And I wanted to call that out because there's some future work that I do anticipate, we could break that up into a less generic catch-all field into more, higher resolution fields like namespace name and, yanked or license for that matter, or even description, if it contains this word in description, return everything.
Well, go back up to the search. So those things can be queried without hitting external resources. I think what rubs me with the latest is actually description and license specifically, because those aren't in the index.
Yeah, license is license in there or not? I don't think, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is more future discussion, like as it evolves. So yeah, I guess to be fair,
so
now we don't need to consider those two things. And like you're saying, Joe, you can basically infer these from the URL itself.
Or not from the URL, but from the like version, yanked, and address you can get from the index, and it's not costly.
Are you tying like basically the implementation detail to these APIs? Because if that's the case, I think that should be part of this RFC then, of like not necessarily details of it, but like the fact that you're tying what these endpoints should look like based on the burden of the implementation seems like this like hidden thing that you keep pushing back against. And
Yep.
like,
No, it totally is. I feel like, okay. Yeah, that's fair. I don't think that's inherently wrong though. Like, I feel like that's inevitable in a lot
it's
of,
fine.
especially
it's just not clear from the discussions and from reading this that that is a factor.
Yeah, that like one of the goals is to design an API that minimizes operational burden. That, I think that is a goal.
Mm-hmm. Especially starting.
If you look at, even if you look at like the GitHub API, it's like, what the hell? Why can't I get this thing back from it? And you can kind of infer that it's because, oh, if I did, it would be expensive to their services.
Right now, I'm inclined to make the change to the latest then to be more similar to what we currently have in the versions list, and then see how it evolves from there. So do we have any other strong opinions or thoughts?
I guess I'm curious, like, what is there's clearly like a thing that is not talked about in this RC, but what is the implementation that we're forcing ourselves to stick to that is determining what we can put and not put in this thing? So I feel like there's this like hidden part of this thing that makes it hard to talk about it.
I think you talk a little bit about the service behind this, right? And how it gets the index on the file system and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, right now it is.
But yeah, how it performs a git pull. Yeah. I agree with you, Terrence, but I'm saying I think some of it is buried away in here.
It's just trying to normalize basically what we currently have in the GitHub repo.
So you're gonna do a file system basically check to pull the data, or are you loading in a memory basically when you boot up the server?
It loads it into memory. Yeah. It'll do a get pull periodically to make sure that it's at least getting the latest changes. And then after each successful get pull, it essentially renormalizes the in-memory representation of the entire repository for the Buildpack registry. And then it creates indexes on these different fields, like the namespace, the name, that can then be easily searched against.
Indexes being just like dictionaries in memory.
Pretty much. Like I'm using a third-party library right now where I just specify which fields in the JSON object that I want to be searchable. So, but yeah.
seems like the implementation detail that would drive out not wanting to include a latest in the search results is the detail of when the search API would reach out to the image registry to fetch additional information, right? And I sort of agree. So I'm inclined to agree with Joe, because that's like one of the more expensive things it could do. But if we don't do it until someone requests a particular build pack, and then after that we cache the results, it would minimize the chances of that going wrong.
Well, I think it's pretty common for indexes to be behind in registries. Like there's usually a kind of delay.
I don't think being behind is the concern though. It's a cold cache.
Cold cache as in it's not warmed up, like it is slow to hit it.
Yeah, so think about, you have a search and you search for the letter K, which matches all the Heroku build packs and the Paketo build packs. Let's say you get 1,000 build packs back.
Sure.
And let's say there's no cache. You have to make 1,000 Docker Hub API requests to get the config blob, just to get the description and the license. That is, in addition to being error prone.
I mean, I just think it's crazy to like build an API like this and really just not back it with like a relational database or something, if you actually want to do that.
Yeah, I'm on Terran's side. I feel like the API is very limited as far as the search functionality goes if we don't have the additional pieces of data. Like, something very useful is description, right? And the description isn't stored in the registry, it's stored in the image. So like when you're listing out, and even for searching, right? If you wanted a search description, which I think would be valuable, I think when you get the list back of results, you want to be able to have a better idea on what it is versus just the namespace and the name, right? Like JVM, does this include Kotlin, right? Does it have Scala, Kotlin, and whatever? Like you wouldn't know that until you drill down. And once you get like a whole bunch, like if I search for Java, right? Am I going to be able to get the one that is actually named JVM, but happens to include Java in the description? So I just don't, sorry.
The thing that's untenable, I think, is when you do a search, only then for every search result do we go and fetch the data from the registry. Like if the cache is cold, I feel like that can't work. So I think the two options are don't return that from the search and do it when people request a build pack, or it's when I update the index, kick off some background job that's going to go and populate this cache. And then if you search before it's populated, you just don't get that data. I think those are the two options in my mind.
Right. And I think that's maybe where Terrence is going. And I would propose for that as well, where we have a background process that essentially pulls this information.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. So now we're talking stateful, we're talking background jobs. I mean, the operational burden on this is getting much more significant. So we can have a description. Like that feels ridiculous to me.
I feel like that's just the state of how you build an API to back a registry. Like this is the way. And if a requirement is that we don't want any of that stuff, then that's fine. But I feel like that's not actually clear in this RFC that is like a hard requirement here.
I personally think things are going to change probably more in that route with, using database and more background process and things like that with caching. My intent with this RFC is to start out really simple and then have the flexibility to evolve as we encounter these issues and these complexities that we need to solve for. So that's where my head is at. But I totally hear, like, especially Javier, in terms where you guys are going with that, because I think down the road, it probably does make sense to have some sort of relational database where we can have more metadata that maybe we don't want to include in the index itself on the GitHub repo, and keep that up to date in caches and things like that.
So ultimately punting on it and making a incremental kind of MVP.
Yeah, like I like to increment, especially when there's so many unknowns right now with this. Like,
I mean, are there that
Yeah.
many unknowns? I feel like a registry that does search is like a pretty well established thing
yeah,
in ecosystems. Like it's not like there isn't tons of prior art for this.
that's fair. Yeah, there's definitely some.
We're doing some
prior
things
art.
differently. Right. I mean, I agree with you, Terrence, but we are doing some things differently. I think the other factor here is we're talking about 2 people wearing the pager for this. And until we're talking about something other than that, I'm hard pressed to increase operational burden beyond a process, a stateless process.
I mean, it's like you said,
Yeah.
though, it's like non-critical path. So like if it's down, it's fine.
Yeah, sure. But like, I think during working hours, we still, we don't want to let this thing be down for a week, right?
I mean, is there a way to expand that beyond 2 pagers? Just because I know I made the proposal for, just like we do for other infrastructure pieces, we give it to not just maintainers, but contributors as a whole. So as long as they're verified contributors, I don't see why they wouldn't have the same sort of privilege to access the system in order to resolve any sort of hot burning situations.
I mean, that could be an RFC in itself, probably.
I was gonna say that's a completely separate discussion, probably, and how do you orchestrate and schedule who's responsible for that particular minute when something does happen.
Well, I guess if
Yeah.
if that is the question that's kind of restricting what we can do here, then I wonder if we need to solve that first, right? Otherwise, I don't know
Is it
why
though?
that's an
We're
argument.
talking about. Is it though? We're talking about a description. Like literally, we are talking about a description, and all of this to get a description. Like I agree, it's important, right? And I hope we are successful such that people need to be able to search the description. But in this first take, I just feel like we're adding a lot of, just adding a lot. If we're talking about contributors and figuring out how contributors and maintainers access the actual service and operate it, and I don't know.
I mean, I don't disagree with you, Joe. It just seems like when someone thinks of a registry that you can search, like in no world did I think of, like, I didn't even think about building a thing that was stateless. Like, I just feel like that is what, when you think about a registry, that is just what I think most people expect, right? Like, it's a thing where you're not going to include a bunch of stuff in the index because you want to keep the index as small as possible. So you're going to want to have to pull that information somewhere. You don't want to make that query more than once. So that means you have to store that data somewhere. But if that's a hard requirement, then that's a hard requirement. So I guess like in Travis's original RFC, he had like, he embellished some of the fields. So like, I guess that also just made me think of, this is going to be a data backed API that he's going to be building.
I think that's the long-term goal.
Definitely, yeah. That's where my head was when I embellished the payload with these future fields.
So is there a path here where we can spec the API, yeah, the way that we want, but then for like, just for example, omit description until we're, until some later iteration, because it could, like, something like that is backwards compatible.
Yeah, we can just add it to the object.
It'd be description
and
license, yeah.
Yeah, right.
And then those would be filled in when you actually do a query for the individual object. Is that right?
In the first iteration, yeah.
So you're saying that, I guess you have to, every time someone does that query, we're going to have to basically pull that data live.
Not the query, but the hits the endpoint for that build.
Right, and we have to basically, if it's not cache, we have to go pull it.
I mean, yes, I think there are some easier caching mechanisms we could use though in that case, rather than like to do it for search, you have to have a database. But for the like Buildpack endpoint, you could do an in-memory cache. You could do a Redis or something like much simpler. That's just, you know, key based.
Sure, but you still have to fetch the data. Are you saying that doing it live versus a background process?
Yeah.
And then basically anytime the
yeah,
server
or like,
reboots, you have to pay that cost every time.
Not if it's in a Redis. But then you can also, I think with that endpoint, you know, if something fails or there's a cache miss or whatever, it's,
yeah. I mean, I assume we're not doing Redis because that's like yet another service that has to be maintained, right?
But I think we can do that. But I think like having a Redis to just reduce the number of API requests we hit or API requests we make to like Docker Hub, that is actually not as big a deal. Because if the Redis goes down, then you just start making API requests. I think that's that's enough. I think that's a burden we can take on. But I mean, maybe I'm picking hairs.
I feel like you're splitting hairs at the point you're adding a separate
hairs,
process at that point.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe Travis, we should talk about what we're comfortable with and if we think we can support what the sort of like ideal API is here.
Yeah. I mean, I will plus one a thing if the requirement is like, if one of the goals is we don't want to run a thing. But I think that also includes removing Redis and other stuff, because I feel like you want to minimize basically, if the ultimate goal is to have a serviceable thing that is a single process that doesn't have Redis, then I think that's fine. But I feel like the moment you're adding another database, like another like kind of thing, like I feel like you're kind of splitting hairs at that point.
Yeah, you might as well go all the way and make it a lot more functional.
Yeah.
Because even like the search result page that we'd want to create for the front end, it'd be nice to have the description and license displayed without having to drill down.
Yeah, and you could probably even do that in Redis, right?
Yeah.
Complexity difference between populating that Redis in the background versus on request, I feel like probably isn't that high, if that's the difference. Like relational database versus Redis might be a big difference, but background versus foreground isn't at that point, I feel like.
Yeah, I think I probably agree, but I think Travis and I probably want to discuss it to make sure we're comfortable before.
Yeah, let's discuss it. Let's again, I'm thinking MVP here, so let's talk, Joe. We'll see what makes sense and then go from there.
So let's do this though. In the meantime, can we leave it the way it is right now? And well, maybe that's not fair. I was gonna say you can all vote on it, and then if we decide that we're not comfortable operating that thing, we'll just back out of it or something like that. But we'll just wait.
Okay. I don't have anything else. I think this is the big topic. So once we resolve this, I think we'll be good to go for finalized votes.
Sorry, I pulled up the mock-ups that I did for the UI, and I recall we talked about like latest updated date. Is that still something we want to do? I know you would be able to maybe do that. I don't know the exact complexities behind that.
What is that again, Javier?
Like, the latest, the updated date. So I could share my screen.
Like a timestamp, and actually,
yeah, like.
Is that a part of the OCI registry spec? The date, do you know? Because if it is, that would be easy.
We zero it out, right? So I think it would be some weird way of determining the commit hash, or sorry, the commit in which it was introduced.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we can get it from the Git index. Yeah.
Good. Nice.
Do we like? I
Yeah.
think it'd be nice to have just so that people know how stale they are. But
Yeah, like last updated and more, yeah. That would be a part of the namespace slash name endpoint. Is that what you're thinking? Inside of the latest object, have a last updated timestamp.
yeah,
Okay.
and that shouldn't matter to the conversation of whether we pulled the image or not, right? Because it's from the index itself. So we
Mhm.
should have it on the search. And just for the sake of brevity, this is the mock-up
That
I was talking
data.
about. Right. So
So
having possibly description and license would be great, but that's a separate conversation. Then when we drill into this, right, if you look at some of this, we do talk about supported stacks. And I know like it's really weird because we don't have this information about like,
yeah.
well, we kind of do, but yeah, anyways, like you could look at this and we could talk about it further for maybe the next iteration.
Mhm.
I'm thinking long term, we'd want to also index builders to some degree, because otherwise I don't know what I could use this build pack with.
Builders or stacks?
Builder, well, that I think that's part of the conversation, right? How do we really do that? Because essentially we use builders in a lot of places, but ultimately they're composed of stacks, and the stacks are the what have that information.
Yeah. This would be really useful.
I think the supported stack information should already be something you can get from the build pack metadata itself, right? It's in the image config blob. Should be because the whole build pack toml is essentially.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I think I was jumping ahead and thinking about the builders or how I would actually like this doesn't tell me an image I can use, right? It just tells me this like abstract or I guess specification of an ID, but it doesn't tell me what I could point to actually use it.
Cool. That's it for me.
Next on the list is a flexible project descriptor, Terrence.
Yeah, this has just been that draft that I guess we put back in a draft. And I just want to, we've been making some headway on some stuff internally for this. So I'm just want to bring it back before I guess make some changes to the RFC of are we still okay with, or what are people's thoughts on, I guess, just making stuff outside of the project and build tables flexible? Basically changing the RFC to remove the, I think the controversial like project kind of whatever, figure out the table name thing, and just the piece that is like someone could be project descriptor compliant, but they have to basically comply with the two tables we've already defined, and we can change those at will. And we don't make guarantees about not adopting new stuff, but those other table names are flexible. I think that was like one of the proposals when we last talked about it.
So we aren't guaranteeing that we'll never grab another key. Or are we guaranteeing that?
I mean, we could. That is, I think, on the table for discussion if we would or would not. But
I mean, when we do, wouldn't we be bumping the version of the project
spec,
descriptor?
yeah,
I don't even remember. Yeah, it is spec, right? So
yeah,
there's a version
expect
associated
under
to it.
extension, yeah.
So I don't see a problem there, right? Like we would update it and be like, okay, now we've taken this key. So as soon as you bump to O2, right? Like if you're using this key, it'll no longer be accepted or it has to be in this format.
I think the disadvantage there is that it forces every new key at the top to be a major version change for the file instead of a minor. So every new key at the top is considered a breaking change if we version it like that, right? Or like that. I mean, it's the same thing as if you didn't. Same result as if you didn't have versioning, right? The user still has to do something. It's just communicated, you know.
Yep. Which is better than nothing, but not ideal. Yeah, so I mean, I guess the advantage for like the Salesforce side is we could have like a Salesforce key, which I assume the Buildpack project would never take.
I don't know.
I don't know, maybe you will.
I feel like one other concern would be, let's say a couple different platforms then go ahead and define top level keys, but they define them differently. Now, can you not push your app to different platforms because they have different meanings in a way that could cause problems?
Yeah, I think that's true.
I feel like the less pretty but safer thing, like you can make
is that any different if they did the same thing under metadata? Like if you basically just replicated that functionality but namespace it under metadata, and platforms interpreted the things in metadata differently, like as exists today, that the statement you said is also true, right? Like if under metadata I defined a table that was like, I don't know, function endpoint or something, and I'm a FAS, and two platforms somehow came to the same name under there and then basically handled the schema differently.
Yeah, I've never really imagined platforms using the metadata. If I'm being honest, it's more like other than to like read and display it. I know we have Buildpacks that use their own metadata.
Right, but that's Buildpack Tunnel, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine. I think metadata to some extent implies kind of like non-functional to me.
There may be functionality that's specific to a platform that you want to configure in the same file as the stuff that's generic across all platforms. So like, it seems like it's hard to solve that. You know,
I would suggest like maybe a slightly different, similar to just putting things under metadata, but if we had a platform table and then we said that platforms should reserve a key under platform, I feel like we don't have to worry too much about those conflicting. It was like platform.heroku, you can put whatever you want in there. And then you could have one app where you've committed a project toml where that same app could be pushed to a variety of different places.
we could even leave it open so you don't have to define a key under it. You just kind of risk like, you know, a key on Cloud Foundry or what, you know, whatever means something different than a key on, you know, whatever other platform.
Yeah, I think the pushback on the proc side for us would definitely be anything that requires you to put it under another table makes it feel like a second class citizen, like kind of thing. It's like,
but what's the difference between Salesforce as a top level key versus platform as a top level key? If it's the same, if the data is at the same level.
Because potentially you might want like two different keys, right, to define two different things.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Two different keys for.
Well, like for instance, like Salesforce implies you'd want to put everything under just Salesforce. But if you make it open, potentially you would make a config that feels more native to platform that may not just be Salesforce. It would be like, here's function configuration. Here's like Salesforce has a bunch of products, right? So like, here's a Commerce Cloud kind of configuration versus having to deeply nest everything under platform that then like starts underneath it, if that makes sense.
Got it. You want multiple top level keys.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if we have that today, but I think product wants that flexibility.
We could like say that keys that start with something are reserved at the top level for platforms as opposed to, you know, exact key names. So like platform dash, if the top level table is named platform dash, then it's we're never going to claim anything at the top level. It starts with platform dash, right? And then you could have platform dash Salesforce functions, platform dash, whatever. I don't know if it's the prettiest solution in the world, but it meets those requirements, sort of.
I mean, based on the TOML thing, it's pretty much the same, right? You're just replacing a period with a dash.
Yeah, that's a good point. You should definitely do that, TOML. Yeah. Oh, maybe show the product people the dot at the top level, like platform dots, thing, and see if they if that makes them feel better about it. You could document that everywhere, right? Because it's that gives you, if it's a top level platform table that contains subtables, right? Then it gives you infinite number of top level tables in TOML. I mean, I don't know if this really fits your requirements. I'm just.
I mean, what if we did the opposite and it was that, CNB was a thing within project descriptor, right? And then anything else above it could be, free for all, essentially, for any other sort of platform or whatnot. But then under CNB, then you have build and all this very, CNB specific stuff. And so we've grouped it and we've allocated a namespace essentially for us, and then others could create additional namespaces throughout at the top level.
It's the spec for Project TOML would be weird a little bit then, or like it's what that's communicating is like, here's a file. There's because it's called Project TOML and it seems like it's a little more general than just build, right? We're saying here's a file to describe your app. The only reserved key has to do with building the app, and no one can ever, no project can ever say, okay, this is our key that we, claim necessarily, because who knows who else is using that. There's no way to pre-reserve a namespace. But
well, I think
opposed to it. It just it feels a little bit weird to me.
I mean, I feel like there's kind of like conflicts on both sides, whether project descriptor is like agnostic to CNB, or if it is a definition of the things that the CNB project cares about, and then we're just allowing others to add their information as well, right? So I think those are on two different spectrums, and I don't know that we've answered that. I think Joe has one, one preference, but I feel like we're at this moment kind of on the other side, right?
Buildpacks.toml.
Well, if Project TOML isn't a thing that we're defining, right? If we're saying there's a concept of a project descriptor that is not part of the project, right? That's like anybody is bringing. You could have a Salesforce TOML or whatever, right? And the file itself is not being defined by the project, but the project is defining a key within a table of an arbitrary file, right? And the Pack CLI looks for that arbitrary file called Project TOML, right? Or assumes that file will be called Project TOML. Then I think to me that clicks together. But that's not how Project TOML I feel like has been proposed. But like I don't mind going that direction, right? I'm not pushing back on anything necessarily. It's just my philosophizing about configuration.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of this comes from not wanting to have yet more files for configuration to some degree, especially because already in the project descriptor, there's, and even as we add more stuff, especially when you think about stack packs and other things, I feel like to some degree the things that are being advocated is like Salesforce should just have a Salesforce.toml that is separate.
This is kind of like the original project, or the original idea for making the table name flexible, but could you have when you have the Salesforce TOML file, the file looks one way and it's only for Salesforce platforms, right? And if you have a project TOML file, then that specific kind of configuration, it's more generic, but the Salesforce specific configuration has to be platform.salesforce at the top level. Then it's the user chooses whether or not their app is portable. I mean, it doesn't, it's maybe not like, doesn't completely optimize for, maximum portability, but once you have Salesforce specific configuration, right, you're losing some portability anyways.
I was looking for this prior art that I remember seeing. I just found it. There's a Python file called PyProject.toml that has a tool table, and then a bunch of tools have their own schema under the tool table. So it's like tool.poetry is defined by the poetry project for how that interacts. Thought I'd throw that out there as an example. That would be similar to the platform table.
In TOML, do you have to declare the parent object, like platform, before you can use platform.heroku?
You'd probably start with a platform.heroku table definition, but then after that, you could just do key value. But if you wanted to add like an array in there, you need platform.heroku. The name of that key. Not advocating hard that we need to do it this way. I just thought it was an interesting example because it's almost exactly what we're doing, or almost exactly like one of the proposed ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reasonable suggestion. I think the only part that gets kind of hairy is like when you have to do array stuff and you have to repeat table names and you're typing like potentially 3 nested, like 2 dots in that thing because it's like platform.salesforce.something else array.
Yeah. That's why I thought it was interesting. This example is also a TOML example, right? Not like a YAML example or something where that would be sort of wondering whether how deeply people want to nest their TOMLs in general.
Yeah, I do think there's probably more limited scope around a dependency tool like Poetry than there probably is around potentially a platform of like configuring an app.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty good find.
I feel like you could change it to break out too if you wanted to, like instead of specifying, like you could have the whole thing inline, or you could have another option, like if an escape hatch if things got too messy, where like platform.heroku could then, the only key in there could be a path for a Heroku file or something, and then you'd go read it and stitch it together.
I was thinking about that. For Terraform, you use modules, right? And you specify a source of like where this other thing lives. And so I wonder if that would satisfy the product use case if you had a Heroku file and then the project descriptor just pointed to it in some form or fashion.
But that gets into like Terrence doesn't want a proliferation of files, but you could sort of have it both ways. Like you could have it inline, but then if it starts to feel bad, you could pull it out.
So what I'm getting is you're pretty against opening up the top level keys.
I'm not like super against it. I feel like a little bit meh about it, but I could be convinced if that's what everyone else really wanted to do.
For what it's worth, I'm pro. I think it would be good. And I think the only thing that we could think of is if we needed to add a top level key, then we'd have to bump a major version of the spec.
The thing that makes me feel a little bit reticent is pushing to multiple platforms. like I want to be able to, let's say, started using this in more places. I'm thinking about the spring project, for example. Like we want to get people using Pet Clinic with Buildpacks, right?
Are you generating one now today with that Pet Clinic?
No, we don't have a project tunnel in there. But imagine a world where we did, where we're trying to into some of these canonical examples, like push easy build pack configuration. We wouldn't want to pick a platform winner. So if platforms had to find these different keys differently, then rather than being able to support everything, you'd have to pick one. If the keys conflicted with each other.
But I think best practices, right, in convention, like almost naturally would make each platform sort of create their own namespace.
I don't know. I can imagine 3 platforms that would all define function, right?
Yeah,
that seems really realistic.
Well, I mean, we could put that recommendation in the spec, right? Like you should put your stuff in a namespace.
Yeah,
to prevent conflict.
I guess on that particular project, I know we're over, so if people need to go, we can cut this short, and I can just talk to Emily and Javier about it. But I know there was talk, at least from RPM, who was kind of doing this work of if there is something like function, it'd be nice if we could standardize that across actually all the platforms, and have that be a thing. Of is there a way we could standardize that kind of level configuration if the namespace does collide? Because right now that doesn't exist today, and it's kind of a nightmare.
I got to run, but maybe we can follow up later.
Cool. Thanks,
I
everyone.
have one more radical idea if you're willing to stick around, Terrence.
I do.
So it seems like if we go down the route where project descriptor is not the Cloud Native Buildpacks file, but maybe its own standalone thing, then I think a lot of that makes sense, right? Where we want to standardize across different platforms, different tools, and all that. And I think that would be overall good. But then to kind of keep that kind of notion of having, that Buildpacks YAML file or something that is very project specific, we could do what we talked about where the project descriptor can have this idea of pointing to a Buildpacks TOML file, right? And kind of importing that into the project descriptor. But then pack would more or less just look for the buildpacks.toml because it doesn't really care about the other stuff, right? Unless you're thinking and proposing otherwise.
So would it read like a project TOML that would then look for a buildpack TOML for that data? Because the project TOML defines where that file is defined, or is it just look for buildpack TOML?
I think pack would just look for the buildpacks TOML, right? And so then if you wanted to incorporate this into this bigger, more standardized project descriptor, and then those platforms that do support project descriptor, right? Hypothetically, like Heroku or I don't know, Tanzu. Then you could create the project descriptor file, and then within that project descriptor, define or point to the buildpacks file for that additional configuration for how to build the application. But then everything else related to the project would be elsewhere, right, at a high level.
Where does stuff, I guess some of the stuff that feels, I guess off to some degree with that is where, would the project table go in that buildpacks TOML? Because that feels like a thing that you would want to have at the top, in that main one from what you're suggesting, right? Because it's the name of the image. What we've got. It's a lot of metadata documentation stuff, right?
This is a spec, right? We've already got this.
Yeah, and then extensions. Yeah.
So right now, the top level project information Do we actually use that for anything?
In pack, I don't know. Do we? I don't think we do.
No, like I mean, I'm just thinking from like an app image perspective. Like, is any of this information actually stored in the app image? And I can't, like, maybe source URL. I know we had something about that. And then licenses.
Don't we store license as a label, or is that not true?
I think, yeah. So I think source URL and licenses. So it might make sense for those, and that might be the thing that kind of makes this solution not work. But like, I feel like everything else, like build related, is like a very specific CNB thing, right? Like, I can't see anything in the build area being agnostic to any other platform or any other system.
Yeah, I think the build stuff, yeah, I think having the build stuff there, is the part that for sure a lot of folks want, because it includes how to build your app.
But only via Buildpacks, right?
Yep.
Not
Yep.
like build your app via,
Docker
Gradle,
file.
Maven, or some other
Right.
mechanism or build system. Interesting.
Yeah, and that's something like a core part of, like, when I think of, I guess I think of like, I don't know how familiar you are with, I guess like app JSON from Heroku or some of our other attempts of kind of doing some of that stuff. When you think about writing a file like that, you definitely want the build stuff, because it includes stuff like, yeah, the build packs of like, this is how you build it, but then also like environment variables are used at build time, things like that, right? Include, exclude files. So all that stuff feels like very central and crucial to, if you're describing, if you wanted a file that described like how this thing is built and constructed, like you probably would want that build key in there, right?
Yeah, but is it generic enough, or is it specific to Cloudnative build packs? I guess that's the part that I'm really confused about what we're really trying to achieve here. Because right now it seems like it's very specific to Cloudnative build packs.
Yeah, I think it is, just because that's what we spec'd and that was the easiest thing to get through at the time. But you can imagine like an equivalent thing where instead of build.buildpacks, it was like build.dockerfile and it pointed to some Docker file, right? And it wasn't even like a table, right? You just do build.dockerfile equals path or something, right? You can imagine in some more agnostic thing that you could have a thing like that, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
So what was the rebuttal with having, like, if we look at this, if it was like cnb.build and like all the stuff being cnb and then project at the top level, and then you could essentially have Heroku and any other type of information at the top level?
I don't know if there was a ton of rebuttal besides people, it just feels less nice to write a descriptor for your own project that has that namespace. I think that's like the big thing, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what, like, I don't know if I'm really leaning towards it, but definitely I think would be nice if project descriptor wasn't part of this. I think the only downside is, we've talked in the past about how the proliferation of Docker files kind of does promote the Docker ecosystem, where we may want something like Buildpacks that, kind of does the same thing for the Buildpacks project. And then I think that's where I was trying to maybe marry the both of them. But I think if we're trying to be inclusive, it seems weird that the Cloud Native Buildpacks project is creating a generic file for every platform, if I'm being honest. That just doesn't seem, I feel like we're struggling a lot right there.
Yeah, I feel like part of the difficulty with that is you either can project toml, but then you're forcing basically everyone to create yet another file, right? Because at that point you would basically be like, nope, like we probably wouldn't even have a project. Like, get rid of the project key. Like, don't have a build key, just have build packs key and whatever other kind of keys at the top level, right? like if you're looking at what it is today and we want to do, I think that suggestion, right? Like, I feel like if Pack is not using any of that stuff, like, not that Pack is the only platform, but it's like, it's not even really about the platform at that point. It's like, what does the Buildpack project need to know to build your thing? It's right. It's like what the Buildpacks are and like build level configuration that it can read. But I know like to some degree, I feel like Dockerfile is very specifically Docker though, right? Like there's no way to insert metadata. It is 100% just a build file. And to some degree, I feel like Buildpacks, because Dockerfile doesn't, the stuff I think we put in Buildpack, like Project Toml, is none of the stuff that really goes into Dockerfile, right? Like all the stuff that would mostly go into Dockerfile goes into the Buildpack itself that a Buildpack author creates. But stuff that's like what even, like if you have multiple Docker files and how you, well, I guess you have like multi Docker stuff potentially that would be equivalent to like multiple Buildpacks.
Like
So
the
yeah,
multi-stage build
the
kind of thing.
multi-stage stuff where you like from and then like eventually you build the container, but it's still like very tied to like it's kind of a weird analogy because it mixes like implementation with basically some like, it's like marred in the, it's like baked into the implementation, right?
Yeah.
Of like how you piece that stuff together. But like if you want to say like exclude files, that's Docker ignore, right? It's a separate file. So to some degree, I feel like the Docker file thing is it is mostly akin to Buildpacks in our world, I think, for the most part.
Yeah, that's
then
probably very true.
And like how you even manage like Dockerfile dot, like multiple Docker files is like, that's your problem, right? Or how you
Yeah,
pass environment variables, like got to do that via the CLI. Like there's no file that allows you to kind of automate that, like create a make file, make that happen, right?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I definitely agree. And I think if we're only going to be losing that sort of notion where we can have a buildpacks.toml or whatever, I mean, we don't technically have that right now, right? And so like
No,
right now it's
and
called Project Toml.
We also don't push it very hard, right?
Right.
I think it's gonna change when stack packs and their stuff come into existence because you'll want to do mixins and other things. And so I think you'll, because people want that function, like there's basically nothing today that you need to use a Project Toml for the most part, for most people doing like a like getting started build, right? Like Pack lets you do a lot of stuff by definition or by design. Like you can pass all these as arguments, right, to
Yeah.
Pack. So like you technically, if you never learned about Project Toml, you don't need it, and you could probably just write your own makefile that like wraps Pack with the right flags, and you never needed Project Toml, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of just been core of like what we wanted, and Project Toml is just like a way to basically pull that together and something you could check in instead of having to write a makefile.
Yeah.
So do you imagine with stack packs, like people will be able to pass mixins via, because you can't pass mixin stuff right now, right? Via
No,
Pack? That's not
that's something. Yeah, like I guess we haven't considered yet.
like is that what you're thinking of, or you haven't thought that far yet?
Definitely haven't thought that far, but now as I'm thinking about it, I'd like to see what one of these, Toml files ends up looking like, because I think maybe at some point there may be a shift where we say like certain arguments are available via the CLI, and maybe even all of them. But I think in a lot of cases it would just make more sense to say, okay, just point us to the project descriptor, or just create a project descriptor file if you really need to, adjust some of these things. And from a UX perspective, that would be a lot nicer than having to like know all these flags you have to pass in every single time just to build your project, right? So just from a better practice, that might be overall a much desired state.
Yeah, I mean, I know like a big thing. So like we introduced app JSON, but one of the complaints was that you can't get push with it. It was just for like Heroku button, and people
Yeah.
really wanted a way to be like, I want to define the stuff in app JSON part of my build. I don't want to like, because basically the equivalent was like you had to literally run like Heroku commands to get the same functionality. And it's just like, let me check in. So like when someone else clones this thing, they get literally the same
Right.
kind of setup and infrastructure. I guess you have like Terraform now where you can do it, but um, there's downsides for I guess like services and things that aren't like kind of designed to work in a Terraform like fashion, because there's it, like a service can't make guarantees if like what happens if this thing fails when it tries to set this up. Do you like bail out? Do you try to recover from it? Like how does that work, right?
Yeah.
And a platform level thing can definitely make stronger promises on what it can do with its config.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we even had an issue recently for like GID where we wanted to add that as a pack argument. And I thought about like it'd be kind of weird if you needed it for the specific project to have a very specific GID, but then it only works on pack, right? And like you wouldn't be able to then build it appropriately with the same parameters in something like Tecton or Heroku and all that stuff. So it's just a very interesting problem that I do think maybe we should be leaning more towards Project Tamil long term.
Yeah, I kind of wonder, like, have you? I mean, I assume you've thought about this too, of just like in that particular case, it's like when we talk about even like Salesforce as a platform for doing CB or Heroku or Tanzu, right? It's just like in that particular case or pack, like should there be a thing that is like not spec necessarily project descriptor, but like that is like pack defines a schema of like configuration for something like GID, where it's like if you build this with pack, like it functions this way because you want it to work that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's specific to like local Docker, blah blah blah, or even
Yeah.
potentially some of the stuff we have in pack config that is not like a global level setting, but is a project level setting, could go in kind of a project toml kind of key or table space. And I feel like we're disservice is not the right word, but we're definitely not pushing project descriptor forward by not having pack be a platform that can leverage it beyond the stuff that's in the spec.
Yeah.
Or that it's an interesting thought exercise at least.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I can't think of, at least right now off the top of my head, too many pack specific things. Like even the GID, I was thinking that'd be more generic because it is a flag that the lifecycle supports. So therefore, any platform that uses a builder would be able to support it, and so on, right? So yeah, but I could definitely see in the future like certain features as pack grows where it is very specific to pack. If pack run ever becomes a thing, right? For instance, that'd be nice as well.
Yep. Pack run, or if you potentially support multiple, well, actually, maybe that's a global level configuration of just like the multiple backends. Right? Is that what we're calling it? The runtimes?
The runtimes, yeah.
Um, but
Um,
but maybe that's global level, and you would just do that across all your projects and not inside of a per project basis.
yeah, I think that's more based on like local development machine versus anything else. Um, I think we could talk about this for a while, but I am curious. We talked about the project descriptor being maybe more generic and how we kind of limiting it to build packs might be the wrong way to go about it. I know Joe was a proponent and thought about the project descriptor being its own essentially project. As weird as that sounds,
Yeah.
is that something that is no longer desired completely, or I guess do you know what happened there?
I think it just got put on the back burner for priority and other reasons. Like basically we asked the app delivery sig in the CNCF, like, do you have a thing we can build on top of instead of us creating our own thing? I feel like everyone hates having multiple files, but not enough that you just create your own file because it's easier.
Right.
Turns out having total control over a thing is easier than trying to work with someone else and figure out had it come
That's
together.
very true, actually.
Because it's like it's the people problem, right? It's just
Yeah.
like, so like, you know, it was just like that, and it was just like, well, it seems like actually a lot of the configuration here is, or at least some of it that we would want is generic. Like, I guess I was thinking of when you look at your like even package JSON or cargo toml, like you have all this like identifying information, but it's fine. It's like for that specific language, right? And so that was part of the design, at least of that project table. It's just like, you probably want some of that info because it's like a app or something. But I guess if we were to go and kind of sunset that kind of idea, I would probably rip all that stuff out. Right? Like you don't need it.
You don't need what exactly? Sorry.
The project table for the most part. Like we were saying before. Like if we were to basically go back from project descriptor and like just create a buildpack.toml or buildpacks.toml
Oh,
file,
right. Yeah,
like
yeah.
I probably would just rip out that table. Like we don't need it. We don't even need nest stuff under build. Probably, maybe we do. We probably would, because maybe you want to have stuff at runtime or something.
Right, run configuration stuff.
Maybe we'll see. But yeah, I mean, so I think that was kind of the impetus for that. But then it was just like, I don't know, just like as a project, it never became a priority to kind of push it to some degree. And even people who use Buildpacks a day, like I guess forget like generic adoption, just like still trying to get adoption within people who are using Buildpacks, right? Of the file.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like we're stuck in the middle, right? Like we're not generic enough for anybody else to use it or want to use it. And
well, that was kind of the push of this RFC, was just like, there are actually a lot of platforms that are adopting Buildpacks. And one of the dangers, I think, of not doing this is like everyone's just gonna make their whatever specific how you do it on each platform, right? Like Salesforce will have their thing, and clearly as we add more features and stuff, like they will need parts of Project Toml. So like, do you just have a thing and then like implement what you need to do to pass it to lifecycle, assuming you're not using pack under the hood. And then like on the Salesforce end for implementation, right? Like our remote build service doesn't use pack, but the local CLI that we have, it uses Docker. So like there's no benefit to rebuilding all the work pack has done. So we're, using pack as a library, common practice. We've seen people do that. And so it just like, it would be nice to, like, from my perspective, from engineering wise and from kind of a business perspective, it's like, it would be nice if the thing we have is compliant and works with that stuff, because we want it to work natively with pack, even if the file name is different, right? And we can kind of pass that stuff and use the library underneath. And then they basically have to make no changes when they move from local development to like using a remote build service from us, right? And that's kind of the kind of desire and design. And there's going to be stuff in there that's Salesforce specific, like to the platform. Like the example we have is like permission sets between basically this function that you're building and the like Salesforce org itself, right? Which pack or CMB does not care whatsoever about, right?
Right.
But for that one particular piece of configuration, you want me to make literally a separate toml file to like put that in. But it is like important to the configuration of the project. And I feel like build and all that stuff for how you build it is also configuration for the project. And it would just be nice for us, like, to be able to insert like a small amount of more configuration that may grow over time, but like we can use as kind of a baseline. That was kind of my thought.
Yeah.
So that's like where we're coming from. And that's like from the product side, like originally I proposed the thing internally that was like, we just put this in metadata, but then they're like, why would we make a thing that's called like a Salesforce toml or something that then forces you to put everything that is Salesforce specific inside of another table that like makes it feel like a second class citizen.
Right.
And
yeah,
so,
and I definitely hear that. I mean, I could see that totally,
and,
especially metadata.
And so then what happened was we literally forked Project Toml and changed like 2 things. And I was just like, this is, so then like what now we have to do is we will have to transform stuff to make it work natively with Pack. And I'm like, this is silly. Like we should just make it compliant and then figure out a way to like not upstream what specifically we want, but a way that allows us to build on it as like a platform to kind of do stuff was the thought.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I'm coming from, if that makes sense.
Cool. So you're not on the extremist side like me, right? Where I feel like we're stuck in the middle, and I'd either like for us to have like a build pack table and just have build pack specific information, or the other side where it's like project descriptor and it's a whole different project and it's like, you know, something more well defined and versatile for others to consume, and the CMB project just happens to not only endorse but actually use that.
Yeah, I mean, I get
spec.
where you're coming from both those things, and those make sense too, right? Like, I think all those are valid paths. That's just not like the angle where our business use case is coming from. Of like, we need CMB to either like make a thing here or do that. Like we have I think there's a path where we can continue to use it, but then like basically make it extensible for us.
Yeah.
But I mean, if we went down the kind of like a separate project thing, I don't know. I guess like I don't know exactly what that would look like if basically nothing else is adopting it yet or
Yeah.
whatever. And I feel like part of it is just like we're still trying to grow CMB adoption. I don't know how much you use or how involved you are with the Tanzu build stuff, but like where do people configure stuff for Tanzu? Are you? I thought I heard VMware is not using Project Helm at all
It's not that I'm aware of. I think a lot of the configuration is maintained in the service itself, right?
with KPack and stuff.
Yeah. So there's like a GUI and all that stuff. So there's like a central command center, I think. Yeah, that's interesting. Cool. I mean, yeah, like to me, still the best one would probably be like I'm thinking long term. Like I see why we're kind of stuck in the middle. We're kind of having to dog food it first before, pushing it out, right? We might find that it's not really as useful as we want it to be. But if that is the trajectory, right, then I would say like it'd be, again, very opinionated, but I would have like a CNB top level key and then put build inside of that CNB stuff, because again, this structure here is very specific to the CMB project. And then we would have, what is it, project and CNB as the only 2 reserved keys. And then we could do whatever we want as far as like minor version specs for the CNB, right? Or at that point, like it could be spec'd in a way where CNB, like that's completely different structure managed by our project, right? But then you could have Heroku, and then the Heroku structure is managed by Heroku or Salesforce, right? And you don't have to worry about it. And at the high level, the project descriptor spec is just saying these are the 3 reserved keys, and these are the things that are kind of pre-allocated. And how you use it.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense to me. I just don't know how excited people would be on the core team to adopt that model.
Yeah.
But I definitely would be +1 going that direction. Just makes it really flexible.
And then if we ever were to kick it out to a separate project, it makes it a lot easier too, right? Because that could be the beginning of this like external project where the same rules apply, right? And then you could get different consensus for different things you might want a top level project.
Yeah, I can imagine it would then be easy to just add like Docker file support for a thing inside of a platform too then. Because you can just have a separate key.
Oh yeah.
That handled that, right? And it's not like CMB owns build completely.
Docker Compose, right? Embedded in here somehow. Yeah.
Yep. That actually would be kind of cool to be able to have all that stuff together, like Docker Compose with that are built using Buildpacks on top of the build kit runtime.
I haven't even thought about that. That's interesting. That's a couple steps ahead of where we're at right now.
Oh yeah. But like I feel like you're the picture you're planting is this long-term thing, right? So it's
right.
I feel like that would be pretty cool, actually. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely am +1 that direction. I just don't know if the rest of the team is.
Yeah, I guess. Again, I didn't hear too much.
I don't think it's a strong pushback.
Pushback?
It's the
Yeah.
classic we're talking about in RFC. So let's
Talk
let's-
about everything. Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about everything.
Pick on everything. Yeah, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I think we're good with 30 minutes over, just on the dot. Appreciate the
Yeah.
extra talk. Extra
Yeah.
time. Cool.
Yeah, thanks a
All right.
lot, Javier.
See ya.